Okay, so we will start today the series of lecture in pediatric neurology that is from related to neurological subject. So we will cover the lecture in around 10 to 12 lectures as far as possible. So the first lecture is basically on a very important topic that is a very, very basic, that is localization in nervous system which is there. So we know per se that the neurological axis basically starts from the cortical brain, it goes to the subcortical brain, then goes to the brain stem, and even the cerebellum is getting involved, and from there spinal cord is there, and from the spinal cord anterior horn cell is going to take care of the nerve root which is there, peripheral nerves are available, and then from the neuromuscular junction it goes to the muscle. So the basic important thing that we need to remember that there are two cerebral hemispheres. We all know that there is right and left sided, and we also know that right hemisphere controls the left side of body, and left sided hemisphere is going to control the right side of the body. And both the right and the left are joined by corpus callosum. And the three important pathways that everybody should remember is that there is something which is called pyramidal system, which is consisting of corticospinal tracts. You also have corticobulbar tracts, and you also have extra pyramidal system which is there. So that means what you are having from controlling the movement is that the person is able to control the entire movement. This is corticospinal tract. So a tract that is basically controlling from the cerebrum to the brainstem is the corticobulbar tract which is there, and any lesion which is present, and extrapyramidal tracts are also going to control the motor movement per se. So the basic terminologies that we commonly use in neurology subsequently that you will realize is that there are terms that we use, that whenever we use the term called paresis, it basically means decreased movement of the body. If there is a complete inability to move the body, then it is called paralysis. If only one side of the body is getting involved, you call that as an hemiparesis. And if only both lower limbs are getting involved, it is called as paraparesis. Quadriparesis means all the four limbs are getting involved, and especially if the upper limb involvement is far, far more as compared to the lower limb involvement, then you call this as basically a double hemiplegia lesion which is there. So you very broadly classify any neurological lesion into an upper motor neuron lesion and a lower motor neuron lesion. So an interruption of the motor pathway from cerebral cortex to the motor neuron, if there is an interruption of the pathway right from the motor cortex to the anterior horn cell, then this is called as an upper motor neuron lesion. If there is an interruption of the pathway from the motor pathway from the spinal motor neuron to the muscle which is there, then we call this as a lower motor neuron lesion which is there. Any child who has an upper motor neuron lesion will very, very characteristically have what is called as a spastic weakness. So whenever any patient has a spastic weakness which is there, you know that the voluntary activity is completely lost in these children, and it is the anti-gravity muscles which are getting involved. That is basically the flexors and anti-gravity muscles are getting involved. But you will realize that this spastic weakness, the reflex activity is relatively preserved. And in any UMN lesion, it's very, very important to remember that it is distal muscle group that is getting affected, and usually the UMN weakness will not result in a wasting. It will result more in spasticity, it will result in brisk deep tendon reflexes, it will result in an extensor plantar response and loss of superficial reflexes. So it is very, very important to recognize that what are the signs of upper motor neuron lesion. Whereas in contrast, whenever we say lower motor neuron lesion, we know that in the lower motor neuron lesion, both flexors as well as the extensors are involved. And you know that in LMN weakness, it is distal predominant weakness. So distal group of the muscles are far more involved as compared to the proximal group of the muscle. And hypotonia is a very, very prominent problem which is there. And there is a loss of deep tendon reflexes, and plantars are going to be flexors with presence of fasciculations and presence of muscle atrophy. And you know that lower motor neuron starts right from the anterior spinal horn to the spinal nerve root to the neuromuscular junction to the muscle. So an LMN weakness will predominantly result in basically an important weakness where you will have distal predominant kind of a weakness which is there. So the only exception that you need to remember is that demyelinating neuropathies might not have very typical atrophy. So you need to understand that if it is a neuropathy, then you know that it is basically an element type of a lesion. So if there is an element lesion, you have hypotonia, you have loss of DTRs, you have planters that are getting flexors which are there. So that means an important difference in the weakness which is there in both UMN and LMN lesion is that atrophy is a very prominent feature of LMN lesion. Fasciculations are a very important feature of UMN. Fasciculations are an important feature of an LMN lesion. Uh, Give me a second. सर मैं तो क्लास ले रहा हूँ अभी. सर गुड मॉर्निंग सर. सर सर क्लास ले रहा हूँ सर अभी. यस यस. आई जस्ट रिटर्न फ्रॉम ओपीडी सर. उनको लैब में भेज दे सर. सर ईजी ईजी लैब भेज दो सर. हाँ जी सर. ओके सर. ओके सर. I'm sorry to interrupt. So upper motor neuron lesions predominantly will result in DTRs getting brisk and tone is usually increased in a lesion. So if you understand this basic difference between an upper motor and lower motor neuron lesion, you can very clearly analyze the patients which are there. So let me ask you a very simple question that if a patient comes to you with muscle weakness which is there for last 10 days and the child is having weakness in both the lower limb and the child has deep tendon reflexes that are brisk, that means knee DTR is brisk, ankle deep tendon reflexes brisk, and plantars are extensor. So do you think it's an upper motor neuron lesion or is it a lower motor neuron lesion? Very good. So why? Excellent. So you all believe that these are all going to be an upper motor neuron type of lesion. Let me give you another example. There is another patient who presents to you with muscle weakness, which is there, and the child has a flaccid weakness all over the body to an extent that the child is now bedridden in the last 10 days. You see that there is a bulbar weakness, there is a quadriparesis, that means all the four limbs are getting involved. Deep tendon reflexes are totally not elicitable and plantars are totally mute. So do you think it's a UMN lesion? Do you think it's an LMN lesion? Excellent. So I'm happy to see that you're all awake. So let me just continue. So we know that uh, you have something which is very important, that is pyramidal tract which is there. So that means you have an important aspect that we need to understand is that you have a corticospinal tracts that basically start right from the motor area. It goes along and it decussates at the level of the medulla, goes to the spinal cord, and then it enters the muscle which is there. So this is a very important pathway which is called as the corticospinal pathway which is there. There is another very important pathway. So that means you can understand that the pyramidal tract is the main controller of the voluntary movement. That means if the child is having a weakness of, if there is an involvement of pyramidal tract, you know that it is going to cause an impairment of voluntary movement, so inability to move the limb. But in addition, you also need to understand that although the main ruler is the corticospinal tract, but this smooth coordination of the corticospinal tract is also taken care by extrapyramidal tract. Now this extrapyramidal tracts include corticobulbar tracts, corticorubral tracts, reticulospinal tracts, rubrospinal, vestibulospinal tracts. So there are multiple extrapyramidal tracts and corticobulbar tracts which are extremely important to smoothen the movement of the muscles which are primarily there. Of this, I want you to just remember a very important pathway which is called as the rubrospinal tract. Can somebody tell me what rubro means? Basically red nucleus. So can somebody tell me where in the brain is red nucleus located? Excellent. So you know that, very good, excellent. So you can make out that it is primarily located in the midbrain which is there. So you know that if there is a midbrain, there is a reticulospinal, any tract that is starting from the red nucleus and going down to the spinal cord, you know that it is the rubrospinal tract. So rubrospinal is what it is going to do. It is going to cause flexion of the upper limb and it is going to cause extension of the lower limb. So that means if you have flexion of the upper limb, that means if the rubrospinal tracts are intact, it is going to cause flexion of the upper limb and extension of the lower limb. So if there is a lesion which is cutting the rubrospinal tracts, that means if there is a lesion below the level of the red nucleus, what will happen is there will be extension of the upper limb as well as the extension of the lower limb. So what will be this called as? This will be called as excellent. So this is very important to understand that if there is an extension of the upper limb as well as lower limb, we call this as decerebrate posturing, which is there. If the rubrospinal tracts are going to be intact, the patient is going to have the flexion of the upper limb and extension of the lower limb, which is called as decorticate posturing. Excellent. So you can make out that these are decerebrate and decorticate kind of a posturing, which is very important. An important point that I want all of you to remember is that, see, the moment that you're talking about the brain stem, there is something called midbrain, there is something called pons, there is something called medulla. The and that midbrain basically has the third and the fourth nucleus, and that the pons is something which is going to harbor the sixth and seventh nucleus. Fifth is something which is going to go whole throughout the midbrain, pons and medulla, and ninth, 10th, 11th are present basically in the medulla. So that means each brainstem will have two sides. That means third nucleus will be present and it will be supplying both the sides which are there. So it is very important to understand that the nucleus which is present, cranial nerve nucleus that is present in the midbrain, is going to be governed by an upper motor tract which is called as the corticobulbar fibers. So corticobulbar fibers are going to project always bilaterally. So that means they are going to project bilaterally except for the lower half of the face and on the 12th cranial nerve, where there is only going to be a unilateral representation and you don't have bilateral representation which is there. Another very important aspect that you all should remember is that very commonly we tend to use terms like spasticity, rigidity. So you need to very clearly understand the difference between spasticity and rigidity. If I want to lift an object from one part, then I know that it is an agonist that has to act and antagonist has to basically relax. But if there is a problem in which, if there is a tone abnormality which is resulting in co-contraction of agonist and antagonist, this is basically going to be called as a rigidity. So that means both flexors and extensors are going to be involved. There is going to be a resistance to passive movement in all the direction right from the beginning to the end. That means I am going to get rigidity right from the beginning to the end. If this rigidity is, that means if I'm trying to flex the upper limb and extend the lower limb, I'm going to get tightness both in the flexion as well as in the, I'm going to get the flexion as well as in the extension. So that means if I try to move the limb from one part to other part, I'm going to get tightness in the entire limb which is there. Whereas in contrast, spasticity is something which is velocity dependent. That means if I do it slow, I will get less resistance. If I do it fast, I will get a catch followed by a release which is there. And an important aspect that you need to understand is that spasticity are going to involve a selective group of the muscle. It will not involve both agonist as well as an antagonist. So it is important to understand that upper limb flexors are involved, lower limb extensors are involved. So an important concept that you need to understand that is that the spasticity primarily means that it is a corticospinal tract lesion which is there, whereas rigidity primarily means that there is an extrapyramidal system that is getting involved. So can somebody tell me which is velocity dependent? Is it spasticity or is it rigidity? Very good. So spasticity is velocity dependent. So spasticity means it is velocity dependent. मतलब धीरे करो तो कम resistance, तेज करो तो ज़्यादा resistance followed by a release. So please understand that spasticity में lesion कहाँ पे होगा? If a patient is having spasticity, where will be the lesion? Very good. Corticospinal tracts are going to get involved. If there is a rigidity, where will be the lesion? Extrapyramidal tract will get. Very good. Excellent. Extrapyramidal tract will get involved if there is a rigidity. Now, another very interesting thing is cogwheel rigidity. So, cogwheel rigidity primarily just means that कि उसी rigidity के ऊपर आप सोच लो कि एक tremor superimpose हो गया. तो अगर एक ट्रेमर उसके ऊपर सुपर इम्पोज हो गया तो उसको हम कॉगवील रिजिडिटी कहते हैं. सो रिजिडिटी इज एक्स्ट्रा पिरामिडल, कॉगवील रिजिडिटी इज एक्स्ट्रा पिरामिडल, whereas spasticity is is pyramidal tract system involvement, which is primarily there. Okay. So another very common term that you commonly tend to use is pseudobulbar palsy. So pseudobulbar palsy means that it results primarily from an upper motor neuron lesion to the corticobulbar pathway in the pyramidal tract. So if there is a bilateral lesion of the upper motor neuron of the muscles of the tongue, face, and swallowing. So if there is a pseudobulbar palsy, you know that it is a bilateral involvement, and most of the patients with pseudobulbar palsy will have also inappropriate emotional outburst, which is primarily there. So let us come back to understand that what all problem can happen. So that means the pathway starts from the cortex to the subcortical structure. It goes basically through the internal capsule, and from the internal capsule, basically you can understand that from the internal capsule it goes to the midbrain. From the midbrain it goes to the pons and then to the medulla, and from the medulla it decussates to the opposite side and descends down as a corticospinal tract which is there. So the lesion can happen anywhere along this pathway, will result in a weakness which is called as the hemiplegia. So that means if there is a cortical lesion, you need to understand that if the lesion is in the cortex which is there, it will result in the weakness which is involving arms more than the legs. There will be an involvement of sensations like cortical sensations like tactile localization, 2-point discrimination. There can be features of raised intracranial pressures which can be there. Usually early bladder and uninhibited bladder can be present in these patients, but the important thing that you need to understand is that the patient will have seizures, the patient will have altered sensorium, the patient will have aphasia, which means that gray matter is getting involved. So whenever you have a gray matter involvement, you know that the site of the lesion is in the gray matter or in the cortex. But if it is a subcortical or a thalamic pathway, again it will result in a contralateral hemiparesis because the decussation is going to happen at the level of the medulla. But you understand that seizures, aphasias are usually not seen in a subcortical kind of a lesion. One of the very characteristic feature of an internal capsule lesion is that you will have what is called dense hemiplegia. That means there will be a dense hemiplegia. That means there will be a complete paucity of the movement of both upper limb as well as the lower limb. And you need to understand that if genu is getting involved, you know that the face and upper limb are getting involved. And if the posterior limb of internal capsule is also getting involved, so lower limb are also going to get involved. But you please understand that if the patient has an hemiplegia, it has to be a internal capsule lesion. If the patient has an hemiparesis, it can be a cortical lesion or a subcortical kind of a lesion. Another very important concept that you need to understand is what is called as crossed hemiplegia. See, please try to understand in this figure. That means if there is a lesion that gets affected anywhere in the midbrain, so that means what will happen is that the nucleus is present here. So that means the nucleus was supposed to supply the ipsilateral side. So that means if there is a lesion cutting at this level, so that means there is going to be a lesion which is ipsilateral third nerve. Suppose in the midbrain it is happening. Suppose for instance, and you know that there is an extensive lesion in the midbrain, so which is primarily involving the third and fourth nucleus. So you know that ipsilateral third nerve will get involved, but corticospinal tracts are going to get decussated and it is going to go down. So that means there is going to be a contralateral hemiparesis. So that means if there is a one-sided hemiparesis and another-sided cranial nerve palsy, the lesion has to be present in the level of the brainstem. If the lesion is present above the level of the brainstem, then you know that it has to be an ipsilateral hemiparesis and ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy. Because I told you a very, very important role that corticobulbar fibers usually have bilateral representation except for which cranial nerve? Except for which cranial nerve? 12th and 7th, lower half of the 7th cranial nerve. Excellent. So that means suppose just imagine a situation in which you have a pontine lesion. You know that this pontine nucleus is going to be supplied only by opposite side corticopulbar fibers. So that means if there is a lesion which is cutting the fibers at this side, so that means there is going to be a same, because the hemiparesis, suppose you imagine a situation in which right sided cortical lesion or subcortical lesion is there. So that means both corticospinal and corticobulbar दोनों कट गए. तो अगर दोनों कट गए प्राइमरली, तो तुम्हें पता है कि ये बेसिकली जो कॉन्ट्रालेटरल साइड को क्रेनियल नर्व सप्लाई करना था वो भी चला गया, जो कॉन्ट्रालेटरल साइड में कॉर्टिकोस्पाइनल ट्रैक जाना था वो भी चला गया. सो दैट मींस देयर इज गोइंग टू बी एन इप्सिलेटरल, सो देयर इज गोइंग टू बी a left sided hemiparesis and left sided facial palsy. So you please understand that if there is an ipsilateral hemiparesis and ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy, you know it is either cortical, subcortical or internal capsule lesion. But if there is a lesion which is primarily located at the level of the brainstem, it is always what is called as the crossed hemiplegia. So that means if there is a Weber's syndrome, you know that basically there is an ipsilateral third nerve palsy and contralateral hemiparesis. Similarly, Millard-Gubler will have sixth and seventh cranial nerve palsy on one side and contralateral hemiparesis. So you need to understand this very, very simple concept. Another important thing that you need to remember is what is called as is about the extrapyramidal system which is there. So in the extrapyramidal system, you need to understand that the power and the bulk of the muscles are relatively preserved. There is bradykinesia, akinesia, involuntary movements which are primarily the important thing. So can somebody tell me that if there is an extrapyramidal or a basal ganglia lesion on the right side, the child presents to me with left-sided hemiparesis, how will be the deep tendon reflexes? There is a right-sided basal ganglia lesion. There is a basal ganglia stroke that has happened, and the patient has left-sided hemiparesis. What will happen to the deep tendon reflexes? Okay, so all of you feel that it has to be brisk. Please understand that एक important concept तुम्हें समझना है कि deep tendon reflexes are usually brisk in corticospinal tract involvement. If there is an extrapyramidal involvement, it is not very essential that deep tendon reflexes have to be brisk. Rather, for that matter, deep tendon reflexes are either normal or they are rather decreased, for that matter, in extrapyramidal system. Rather, not decreased, I will say that it is difficult to elicit in these patients. So please understand that brisk DTR, spasticity, extensor plantar always indicates a corticospinal tract or pyramidal tract involvement. You need to understand that if it is an extrapyramidal involvement always means that there will be abnormal body movements like chorea, athetosis, dystonia. So these are very, very common in these patients rather than primarily the other important thing. Now coming to an important concept, that is the cerebellar lesion. Cerebellar lesion may you need to understand that ataxia, nystagmus, all of them are very, very common, and you all know that intentional tremors, hypotonia, these are extremely common in these patients. So I'm asking you a simple question before we proceed. Suppose there is a child who presents to me, a 1-year-old child presents to me that the child fell down from the bed, had a left-sided hemiparesis and left-sided upper motor neuron type of a facial palsy. Where will be the site of the lesion? There is no other cranial nerve palsy. There is no seizure in this patient. Where will be the site of the lesion? There is a left-sided hemiparesis, left-sided facial palsy, no other cranial nerve involvement. Deep tendon reflexes are brisk on the left side. On the right side, they are perfectly fine. So where do you think will be the site of the lesion? Left, excellent. So it has to be above brainstem. Please try to understand ipsilateral hemiparesis, ipsilateral facial palsy has to be a lesion above the brainstem. जहां पे भी ब्रेन स्टेम इन्वॉल्वमेंट आ जाती है वहां पे एक साइड का ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy and contralateral hemiparesis will always happen. It will never happen So that means there is a crossed hemiparesis in a midbrain pons or a medullary lesion. Whereas ipsilateral hemiparesis, same-sided facial palsy, same-sided hemiparesis will be present in a supracortical kind of a lesion which is there. So let us try to also understand a little bit on blood supply of the brain. We all remember that there are three main supply to the blood brain, that is anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery, and posterior cerebral artery. You know that anterior and middle cerebral artery are constituting anterior circulation, posterior cerebral artery are constituting basically the circulation which is there. An important concept that you need to understand is that the anterior cerebral artery is basically predominantly supplying the medial side of the brain, whereas the middle cerebral artery is supplying the lateral half of the brain which is there, and posterior cerebral artery is supplying the predominantly the posterior part of the brain. So that means if there is a lesion, if there is a middle cerebral artery that is getting involved, you know that the lateral half is going to get involved. And if there is an anterior cerebral artery infarction which is there, you know that it is the medial surface of the brain that is going to get involved. And if there is a posterior circulation that is getting involved, you know it is occipital lobe that is going to get involved. So, and you also remember from your anatomy homunculus that the majority of your leg is primarily getting represented in the medial part. So that means if there is an anterior cerebral artery infarct, you will get a contralateral leg weakness and sensory weakness. Whereas if there is a middle cerebral artery infarct, you get contralateral facial arm and leg weakness with or without visual fields which are there. Whereas posterior cerebral artery infarcts will primarily result in a visual field loss. So that means if a patient comes to me with vision loss, which will be the lobe that will be primarily affected? If there is a vision loss, sudden onset of vision loss, which lobe will get affected? Excellent. Occipital lobe will get affected. What will be the artery that will get affected? Which circulation will get affected? Very good. So it has to be posterior circulation that is getting affected. Suppose a patient, a child comes to me with ataxia. There are cerebellar signs which are present. The patient presents to me also with vision loss. Which out of anterior and posterior circulation is getting affected? Is it posterior or is it anterior circulation that is getting affected in such a situation? Very good. So it has to be a posterior circulation stroke which is primarily getting involved. There is another patient who presents to me. Imagine 10-year-old child who presents to me with an altered sensorium, and you see that the right-sided lower limb is not moving. The deep tendon reflexes are brisk on the right lower limb, extensor plantar on the right side, left side it is relatively normal. There is a right-sided facial nerve palsy also, which is there. So that means right lower limb and right face is getting involved. Which arterial circulation will get affected in this patient? Very good, excellent. You all are able to make out that it has to be an anterior cerebral, because anterior cerebral artery is going to supply the medial half of the brain. If it is supplying medial half of the brain, only lower leg might get involved and upper limb might be totally spared in these patients. So it is important to understand that you need to be very clear that what arterial circulation is getting primarily affected. So the important notes that I want all of you to remember is that if there is a contralateral hemiparesis, contralateral cranial nerve palsy, the lesion has to be cortex or subcortical. If there is a contralateral hemiparesis and ipsilateral facial nerve palsy, you know it is a crossed lesion, it has to be a brainstem lesion. If the patient has seizures, aphasia, apraxia, you know it has to be a cortical lesion. If the patient has a dense hemiplegia, he has a dense hemisensory loss, it has to be an internal capsule lesion. Whenever a patient has involuntary movements like chorea, athetosis, you know that it is basal ganglia lesion. Wherever the patient has deep tendon reflexes that are very brisk, superficial reflexes that are totally absent, you know that you're dealing with an upper motor neuron type of a hemiparesis. And DTRs are going to be, also remember that DTRs are going to be absent in the stage of the neuronal shock which is there. So let me not go into these important thing. An important, just a quick note on an important base concepts in spinal cord. So you all remember that spinal cord has 31 segments, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal system which is there. And you also remember from your anatomy classes that the spinal cord does not always correspond to vertebral level. In cervical it might correspond, but thoracic spinal cord, you know, because the spinal cord is going to end at the level of L1, but the vertebral column is going to go up to S5, which is there. So that means there has to be that if there is a thoracic spinal cord, it corresponds to T1 to T8 vertebral level. Lumbar spinal cord is going to correspond to T9 to T11. Sacral spinal cord is going to correspond to T12 to L2 level, which is there. So similarly, from vertebral level, you can make out in the spinal cord. So you just have to remember that the spinal cord is shorter as compared to vertebral level. So that means if there is a lesion which is present at the level of T10, so that means you know that if there is a lesion which is present at the level of T10 vertebra, then it corresponds primarily to T8, T7 or T8 vertebral level. So if the compression is at T8 vertebral level, you have to add 3, so it becomes a T11 spinal cord. So you need to remember an important correlation between the spinal cord lesion and the vertebral level lesions which are there. The important concepts that you need to remember even in the large fibers, that means you need to remember that there are large fibers and small fibers, and you also remember that the vibration and position sensor being taken care at the level of the posterior columns, and the lateral spinothalamic tract is going to take care of the pain, temperature, and the touch sensation. So posterior column lesions will primarily result in loss of joint sensation, vibration, tactile discrimination. The patient will have a positive Romberg sign which is there. In spinothalamic lesion, you will have a contralateral loss of the pain and the temperature, because you remember that it has to cross at it crosses at one particular level and then ascends. So it always represents the contralateral loss of the pain and the temperature which is there. An important concept that you need to understand is that if there is a lesion which is present at one particular level, the important concept is that suppose it happens at T8 level. So at T8, you will have LMN lesion. Below T8, you will have upper motor neuron type of lesion. So that means if I check the deep tendon reflexes of the knee reflex, which has a root value of L2, L3, L4, what will happen to the deep tendon reflex in a T8 lesion? Will it be brisk? Will it be absent? It will be brisk. Perfect. So you need to understand that there is an LMN lesion at the level of that particular spinal cord, but below that particular spinal cord, it will be an upper motor type of a lesion. If there is a lesion at that level of T8, you know that the sensory, there will be a zone of hyperasthesia around that particular zone. That means if I'm getting a zone of hyperasthesia around the umbilicus, where will be which spinal cord will get involved? What will be the site of the lesion in the spinal cord? If I'm getting a zone of hyperalgesia, very good, T10. So it has to be a T10 lesion. So that means if there is a T10 lesion, so just understand this simple concept that if there is a lesion at one particular level, there will be a zone of hyperalgesia at that particular level. Below that level, sensations will be absent. Similarly, when it comes to motor, if there is a spinal cord lesion at one particular level, there will be an LMN lesion at that level, and below that lesion will be an upper motor neuron type of a lesion which will be there. So please try to understand this two basic important concepts. And you also have to remember that whenever bladder is getting involved, please always suspect a spinal cord pathology, especially if bladder retention is there. So that means if a patient comes to me with paraplegia along with the bladder involvement, that means bachcha pishab nahi kar pa raha, and you know that there is a retention of the bladder, your gut feeling should always go towards that it has to be a spinal cord lesion. Okay, so please understand that if there is a spinal cord lesion at that particular level, there will be a focal muscle wasting. depending upon there will be an element type of a lesion at that level, and below that level there will be an upper motor neuron type of a lesion which will be there. So there will be a focal muscle wasting in anterior horn cell pathology. Fasciculations are usually present. Hyporeflexia, areflexia are very common in the anterior horn cell involvement which is there. So an important concept that you need to understand in the weakness, as far as is concerned, is that if there is an extrinsic compression, it will result. Whenever there is a spinal cord and you have an extrinsic compression, you know that there will be a radicular pain which will be very characteristic. There will be primarily asymmetry, which will be very common in these lesions. But if there is an intrinsic lesion, you know that it is a dissociative sensory loss, which is going to get primarily affected. So please understand that at the site of the lesion, it will be LMN, and below the site of the lesion, it will be an upper motor neuron type of a palsy. So if whenever you have a spinal cord lesion which is there, it goes through a stage of the paraplegia. So that means initially there will be a spinal shock phase, and then the patient will go into stage of increased reflex activity. But it is not essential that all patients have to enter a spinal shock phase which is there. So one of the important way to differentiate extramedullary from an intramedullary lesion is that root pains are very common in extramedullary lesion, whereas sphincter involvement is a very common thing in intramedullary kind of a lesion. Similarly, you also need to differentiate whether the lesion is in the conus medullaris or cauda equina. The only rule that I want you to understand is that cauda equina, that means if there is a lesion of these fibers that are getting there, it will result in significant asymmetrical motor weakness, whereas along with severe radicular pain. So most of the patient will have, difficulty in walking, which will be there, and they will have lot of pain. Whereas conus medullaris lesion, the patient will primarily come to me with predominant bladder symptoms like urinary retention. So you need to differentiate conus medullaris lesion from cauda equina syndrome. So similarly, you can differentiate compressive versus non-compressive kind of a myelopathy. So the two important concepts that you need to understand is that whenever a patient presents to me with a weakness, if there is a generalized weakness, deep tendon reflexes are totally absent, fasciculations are present, the pathology has to be in the anterior horn cell. If it is a nerve pathology, the weakness is distal predominant weakness, DTRs are going to be absent, sensory involvement may be present or may not be present. If it is a neuromuscular junction defect, it will primarily affect face. It will have typical waxing and waning force. There will be ptosis. There will be extra pyramidal, extra ocular weakness, which will be very prominent, and muscle weakness, which is very prominent in these patients which are there. In addition, you also need to remember about the sensory distribution of whenever you are trying to interpret on these sensory localization. So let me just go through few case scenarios. A 10-year-old child presented with complaints of inability to move her right upper limb and weakness of right side of the face with deviation of the mouth to left side. The sensorium is totally normal, no other cranial nerve palsies, sensations are totally normal, both the eyes are deviated to the right side. So what is the site of the lesion? So that means there is a right-sided hemiparesis, right-sided facial weakness, sensorium normal, no seizure, no other cranial deficit, sensations are totally normal, and the both eyes are deviated to the right side. So where can be the site of the lesion in this patient? Okay, so many of them feel that it is either cortical or whether it is subcortical. Can it be internal capsule lesion? Can it be internal capsule lesion? Okay, very good. So all of you agree that it is not an internal capsule lesion. Why? Why do you think there is no internal capsule lesion? Very good. Not dense. They are not very dense hemiplegia. You are getting hemiparesis and not hemiplegia in these patients. So you need to understand that only when you have a dense hemiplegia, you have an internal capsule lesion which you start thinking of. So here you can see that why are the right eyes deviated towards one particular side? Why are eyes deviated to one side? So just to remember one simple concept, that eyes are always deviated away from an irritative cortical lesion. That means if there is an irritative cortical lesion, the eye will deviate away from the cortical lesion. But if there is a destructive cortical lesion, the eyes will always deviate towards the destructive side. So you can remember in a simple form that eyes will go away from irritative lesion and it will go towards the destructive lesion. So it has to be a cortical lesion, and you need to remember that all cortical lesions need not result in a seizures, which are primarily important. Okay, this is another child who is 5-year-old child who presented with clumsiness in holding the objects and inability to stand till now. There is weakness of the small muscles of the hand. There is a sensory loss of the fifth finger and the medial forearm. And there is a spastic hemiparesis. There is Horner syndrome. There is biceps reflex that is normal. So where could be the site of the lesion? So you can make out that the triceps is totally absent. So in any cord lesion, you need to remember that where will be the site of the lesion? DTRs. Very good. So you all agree that it is a spinal cord lesion. Agreed. So if triceps is absent, then where is the site of the lesion? DTRs are always absent at the site of the lesion and they are brisk below the site of lesion, क्योंकि LMN sign आपको उस जगह मिलेगा और उसके नीचे आपको UMN sign मिलेगा. So you need to understand that if triceps is totally gone and the other the lower limb is having spasticity, that means upper motor neuron type of a weakness is happening. So you know that the lesion has to be at the level of C7 C8, which is spread. At least C8 T1 has to be primarily present in this. So I think with this important thing, I would like to conclude that if there is a contralateral hemiparesis, contralateral cranial nerve palsy, think of cortical. If there is a contralateral hemiparesis, ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy, think of brainstem lesion. If there is a seizure, aphasia, think of cortical lesion. Whenever you have dense hemiplegia, hemisensory loss, think of internal capsule lesion. Whenever you have a spinal cord pathology, you have to differentiate whether it is compressive or non-compressive. Wherever you have anterior horn cell pathology, you have to know that tongue fasciculation, areflexia is very common, and in neuropathy, deep tendon reflexes are totally absent. So with this, I finish this class. So if there are any